Well, Mick Foley on his podcast, Foley Is Pod with Conrad Thompson, sat down this week and they were talking about some of the most historically significant factions in the history of professional wrestling. And Foley weighed in on what he thought was the greatest faction of all time. And the answer might surprise you. Check out this clip.
I'm going to put it out there. I know this is sacrilege.
Uh-oh.
I'm going to put it out there that the Bloodline may be the most successful faction in wrestling history. I pay great... Oh, I can see that look on your face. Reason being... Grillo, you agree with me?
Well,
or are you saying...
hang on now. Define success. Are we saying... Now, I don't think there's any comparing the Horsemen to the Bloodline. I think as far as historical significance, you could argue the Horsemen because they were maybe first. The NWO really revolutionized wrestling now. Are you going to make an argument for the Bloodline against the NWO?
I am, because the NWO, because the Bloodline has not yet been diluted greatly with red NWO, red Bloodline.
The B team?
Yeah, as far as making an impact and an immediate impact, I would say the NWO. But I believe Bloodline's in the discussion because of the length of time they've been together.
Yeah.
Because of that, the amazing Sami Zayn work. Look, JJ was great.
Oh, Paul Heyman's the man.
Paul Heyman's the man. Paul Heyman's the man. And people forget there was that rotating cast of characters, to the point where it stopped being a big deal to be in the Horsemen. And we've kind of just willingly forgotten some of the incarnations.
Oh, yeah, they kept it around longer. I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I'm saying
Pillman,
that...
Benoit and Malenko and Jeff Jarrett.
Roma.
I was going to skip that one. But yeah, there is Roma. No, I'm with you. So, listen, I think... I was really curious where you were going with it, because if you were going to say financial success, it's clearly Bloodline.
Yeah, right.
Just as far as the overall value to the company. Now, as far as, money drawn to tickets and all that, I mean, T-shirts, like that NWO T-shirt, my God, it's still a top 10 seller right now. It's just...
Yeah.
So I think there's an argument, though. As a matter of fact, we're going to do that as a poll over at Foley Is Pod. What is the most historically significant faction of all time? Is it the Bloodline? Is it the Four Horsemen? Is it the NWO? Is there another one you want to put in there? You want to throw DX in? Because
I think we should throw DX in as well, because we're talking about them and they were huge. But I'm putting Arn, you do the podcast with Arn and Ole were state of the art.
Oh, yeah.
But Jay and Jimmy... Man, the length of time they've been together.
Longest reigning.
And it really is a bloodline.
Yes.
And it's really unfair to compare anybody to Rick. Roman's a completely different type of champion.
Yes.
But man, it's been a great years.
Man, that's a hard one to say. I don't know that I'm willing to go as far as to say that the Bloodline is the greatest faction of all time or the most significant faction of all time. Certainly, look, they're having a great run, or had a great run. I feel like it's waning now. I think the stuff with the Usos is dying down a little bit. He had that, it looks like they're doing some dissension in the ranks with the Usos and the Bloodline. And Solo Sikoa especially, it looked like he was going to turn on his brother at Backlash. But I don't know. It might be too early to tell. We might need to see, how this plays out and how this ends. Especially because Foley was, part of his rationing was that the NWO got watered down and over-diluted towards the end, which it did. But look at that. Towards the end, when their whole first year, almost 2 years as a faction was undeniable. The Bloodline's only in that territory now, and now everything's starting to change a little bit for them. It might die down and dilute now from here. We don't know. Plus, how has the Bloodline changed the business? The NWO changed the business. NWO was revolutionary. It really was. Obviously, I'm saying the NWO is the most historically significant faction of all time. Well, did they get diluted and watered down? Absolutely. Everybody and their mom was an NWO member, and there was supposedly a method behind that madness that was starting to happen because Eric Bischoff was going to eventually split the brands, do a brand split, and do NWO as its own separate promotion, which is why they started turning into factions, and there was a bajillion of them, and there were undercard guys, and they had their own referees, and it became a whole thing because they were going to be their whole own separate brand. NWO Nitro or whatever the fuck he was going to do. I don't know if that's true or not. Bischoff always says it was, but he never did pull the trigger on that. So, but you saw little tests of it. You know, NWO took over Nitro for an episode. I remember that. They spray painted all the logos and everything, and they did the commentary. And yeah, they had their own pay-per-view. It was fun, but when Hall and Nash debuted on Nitro, that was a game changer. As Kevin Nash has said, I believe this to be accurate. Scott Hall showed up the first week. Kevin Nash showed up the second week. And then by the third week, they were number one. They were beating Raw in the ratings, and they did not let up for 83 weeks. Hulk Hogan, when Hogan turned heel, the reaction that he got, the shit that was getting thrown in the ring, the boos. Hulk Hogan, this baby face from the fucking 80s, from the early 80s. For 10, 12, 13 years, Hulk had been a say your prayers, eat your vitamins face of the company. WWE or whatever, WCW when he went there. The hero. He's American made. Don't you judge my singing. And then they brought in X-Pac as 6. They had the Giant, and then they had Eric Bischoff turn and join the faction. Like, they would come out and beat up the entire roster. And then you want to talk about storylines, right? Well, the Bloodline had a better storyline. This is the best storyline in years in wrestling. Sure. Since what? What other great storylines can you think of in wrestling? Oh, I don't know. How about Sting's fucking turn to the Crow Sting? The whole entire year and a half story that was told about Sting being the imposter Sting attacking Lex Luger, and the entire WCW locker room turning on Sting. I knew it was you. I saw you with my own eyes. I looked in your eyes, Sting. I know it was you. And Sting walks out into the War Games when the fake Sting's out there, and everybody's like, I can't believe this. This is the darkest day in professional wrestling. Something Shivani would have said or something, right? And then the real Sting walks out. And then he says, fuck all of you. And he walks away, and he turns out, he sits up in the rafters with the crow paint, never says a word, never helps anybody, just starts pointing his bat at people. And he wants Hogan. And they built for a year or more to that match at Starrcade where Sting challenged Hogan. And of course, we all know what happened with the ending of that match. Sting didn't tan that day. Hogan wasn't feeling it, brother. Kicked out at 2.5. It was after that, it was shortly after that NWO started to slip. But that entire year and a half build to that moment, I put that up against the Bloodline storyline now. And there might be people that are either, they have the fog of, oh, it was so long ago, I don't really remember it that intricately. Or there are people too young to have lived through that era. Either they were little kids, don't remember it, or they just weren't even born yet. The NWO is more, and not only that, but it forced the hand of the Attitude Era. You could argue that DX was inspired by the NWO. I don't think, and to this day, the NWO shirt is a top 10 seller. To this day, the NWO shirt is still flying off the shelves. How many NWO shirts could you possibly have out there? It's either that or the NW or the Austin 316 shirt. There's probably more NWO shirts, I'm willing to bet, but one of those two. It's the best-selling shirts of all time. Sold better than any Bloodline shirt. I think Bloodline will still be selling Bloodline t-shirts 25 years from now. Think so? We'll see. We'll see. So I think Mick has a bias towards, he has a recency bias. He has a bias towards the current roster. I'm just going to respectfully disagree. You know, you look at the Four Horsemen. They were great in the 80s, but they weren't on a worldwide national level like the NWO or the Bloodline or anything like that. They were still territory-ish. You know, Crockett was national to an extent, but it wasn't in as many homes as later WCW would be or WWF and WWE. So, and as good of a faction as they were, I mean, you're not going to put Arn Anderson and fucking Barry Windham up against Hall and Nash and say, oh yeah, no, they're way better, you know, way better. You're not going to say Ric Flair was a bigger star than Hulk Hogan or a more significant star than Hulk Hogan. And I wouldn't put them, you know, I'd say the Bloodline is a more successful faction, more significant faction than the Four Horsemen. Look, the Four Horsemen were great. They set the tone for factions. They were historically significant for being the faction. The first, I don't know if they were the first faction, but the first, like, faction to that level. And they're still talked about to this day. They're not more significant than the NWO in my opinion, but they could compete with the Bloodline too. I would put the Bloodline above Four Horsemen. Well, we got to see how the Bloodline storyline plays out too. And look, DX was great. DX was an all-time faction. Historically significant more than the NWO? No. They were the answer to the NWO, so there's no way they could be more historically significant than the NWO. There was no big heel turn that set the tone for DX. There was no big jump ship, you know, like Hall and Nash. Yeah, X-Pac jump ship from NWO over to DX. I mean, no, I take that back. That's not because that was a game changer for DX. That really is what made DX, was that new formed faction after Shawn Michaels left and Triple H took over, added the Outlaws and X-Pac. That was the DX that was the money. But it's not more historically significant than the NWO. I present to you the NWO, the most historically significant, greatest faction of all time in the history of professional wrestling. And I have laid out my case to you, but absolutely willing to hear your thoughts. Who do you think is the most historically significant, greatest faction of all time, and why? Back it up with the why. If it's the Bloodline, how has the Bloodline surpassed what the NWO was able to accomplish? And how can you judge that this early when they're still in their first year and a half run, 2 years? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next.
Let me tell you something, brother. You can check out full episodes each and every Sunday right here on this channel, dude. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, and don't forget to take your vitamins and say your prayers, brother.